I think there's a way to tell what kind of group the new villains are, and narrow down the level of threat they might be. Bobby Jean was part of this team, so rather than being a subordinate of Howler, we can assume that he was working under Akka for ulterior reasons. But then, what sort of organization would be puppeteering the Howler Corporation and using it as a distraction? The link between all 4 team members should highlight what the idea behind them is, but that's not the only clue we have. Just like how the first rock human we saw in Part 8 was given a stand called I Am a Rock to convey the wider concept to the audience, the 3 team members introduced together should share some traits just between them that directly symbolize what they are. As long as we analyze the overall group, and then compare that with the symbols just these 3 have in common, we should be able to, at the very least, outline them. But with this story deliberately adding this many characters all at once, I think there are already enough details to identify this third party. First, I think they're human, or at least they're not distinctly a separate people, because Bobby Jean was one of them, and that guy was a middle-aged dude with the supernatural power of a midlife crisis. He had career regret, a family, and a power-only stand based on the idea of not appreciating what you have until it's too late. Glory days could slow down bullets, like how a headshot supposedly takes forever when your life flashes before your eyes. And in true bodiless stand lack of form, his solution fed into the problem because he was wasting the time he had left by looking back. His 2 namesakes were about reflecting, and he had a position you'd need to climb a well-documented career ladder to then settle into, so I'm sure he wasn't a rock human. But then, why would he want to be a part of some scheme and betray the values of his job? Given his namesakes, and the fact that he was an older investigative agent, he might have missed the liveliness of when he was more on the field and his future had options. So I'd guess he welcomed an offer that let him make extra cash for his family because of the thrill that covering his tracks and breaking free from the law would provide. But he's not a mutual leader, which means this isn't some sort of independent club of people who just have each other's backs and passionately share a goal. These are members of a team that belongs to a hierarchy, and they report to someone above them. And it's not just Bobby. So far, the personalities and abilities of the other members we've seen fit the bracket. Ningbo's naivete and distractedness make him generally equal to Bobby by hindering his averagely lethal stand, which I'm guessing is called Pump It. And Laem Chabang's more bark than bite personality, who I'm guessing has evil eye, can't be that much greater, because if the colony of nematodes isn't her ability itself, it has to be tedious to maintain, which speaks against the threat level of her character. So if these guys aren't in charge, then they were picked for some criteria they meet, and the trait that Bobby Jean is confirmed to share with 2 of the other team members is that he was a civil servant, in other words, working for the government. But this operation isn't government, because they wouldn't have picked an uncommitted employee to have a secret duty, and that means whoever made this group is somebody not government who wants pawns in civil servant positions. Law enforcers, investigative agents, firefighters, and some lawyers are all government employees. And seeing as these guys are stand users, someone pulling the strings would only need to have 1 person per industry to stay on top of them, rather than requiring whole departments on payroll. Something that can't afford to write the law, that benefits from having people in all forms of government instead, is behind this team of antagonists. And that's what Jodio might be drawing the attention of, for better or worse. So then, what specific role do these 4 play? The trio introduced together are all named after port cities, and though I don't know any classic symbolism port cities might have, they're places for imports and exports, because being on the water makes them great for trade and exchanging cargo. But on top of shipments, because port cities have commercial traffic and are on the borders of a territory, they're like outposts to guard the entrances to your territory from and collect info on other civilizations, which could mean that this team of antagonists are the eyes and arms of something isolated, so that it can interact with the outside, a ground-level workforce that connects it to the regular world, protecting its stability, keeping it informed, and, with strict permission, acting on its interests. But if that's the case, there might be a way to tell what Key West's stand will be named after, because there would be another symbol in common just between the 3 port city characters. If a premise of the wider group, including Bobby Jean, is that they're all corrupt civil servants for selfish reasons, it seems like each character was designed to have a type of selfishness that specifically contrasts with their type of job. Bobby's self-serving reflection impaired his ability to notice things in time, which for an investigative agent, given and meant to analyze sensitive information, perfectly counteracted his job duties. In Ningbo's case, an emergency responder, a form of self selfishness completely counter to the values of an emergency responder would be if someone inflated the work they logged so they could have a cushy job. Doing nothing while pretending to be busy is a perfect contrast for a firefighter, because other people's lives are significantly impacted if the person they're funneled to in a time of need always fakes their work for their own convenience. The way Ningbo is fidgety, impulsive, and reading into Meryl's actions on just a surface level resembles someone who doesn't put that much effort into anything. And bubblegum is used in media like Ferris Bueller to convey someone who's uninvested in something but satisfying their own whims at the inconvenience of others, because of how deliberately big and loud the bubbles they blow are from the gum they chose to chew in public. That's why I think his namesake is Pump It from the Black Eyed Peas, because the song's about blasting music loudly, for fun, even if it bothers the people around you. Also, his eyes look like black-eyed peas, and the idea of how unfounded highs lead to inevitable lows fits with the type of damage his stand, which forcibly blows air into things around him to make them into poppable bubbles, deals. Fitting this trend though, what would be a fitting type of selfishness for law enforcers? Since they live their lives on the front lines of society, submerged in the extremes and dark undersides of our everyday environments, a fitting version of selfishness would be someone who, rather than use those traumatic job demands as reminders to treat the unaccustomed more delicately or motivation to make change to improve their community, misuses those experiences as justification to enable them to mistreat the unaccustomed in order to feel and enforce a personal sense of power or authority over them instead. This is the premise of the song Evil Eye from that guy from Part 7. It's about somebody who submerges themselves in the macabre because it lets them feel superior to the people who can't handle it, even though the only thing it actually lets them do is drag other people down, either by scaring them or reading them through their blind spots. Also, the lyrics mention seeing creepy crawlers and reading people's souls while taking pride in giving off an intimidating aura, and stuff like worms and fungi that recycle the bodies of plants and animals to keep the circle of life going are the kinds of necessary parts of nature people like to keep in their blind spots for comfort. But if that's Laem Chabang's stand, then out of the 3 characters who symbolize the wider team they're part of, 2 of them have powers named after eyes, which also fits the idea of them being the eyes for some larger threat. What this would mean though, is that Key West would likely also have a stand that references music that has to deal with eyes. I personally don't like spreading predictions for series for a number of reasons, so the only cases where I would are if it's about a rule set, like the power system a story's meant to be comprehensively told under, it's a deliberate mystery given to the audience, or it's only an analysis on the details already provided within the story, which in the case of a series referencing stuff like science or arts from the real world would include those real world topics once they've been made relevant within existing chapters. So I wouldn't guess a character's stand we haven't seen yet just for how cool it would be for the story, but I would be willing to try to narrow down the options for one by taking existing details into account and comparing them to songs, since music is the known source of namesakes. And if we can find 1 or 2 leads for Key West's character from the story provided so far, we might be able to find a perfect match among the songs that are tied to eyes. The first thing I'd want to do is go over the way that Key West might be selfish. If we assume the others are an emergency responder using the vulnerability of people to pad their numbers, a law enforcer taking advantage of criminal activity to harass civilians, and a criminal investigator self-absorbed in his ambition, Key West would be a lawyer who undermines the premise of lawyers for personal gain. Lawyers are meant to know the relevant laws and represent the parties of a legal dispute, so their back and forth efforts end up compromising and outlining the equivalent legal scenario. They're like ChatGPT, with the jurors being calculators and the judge being the teacher you want to grade from, but you're graded on a curve in a class with only group assignments. So if a lawyer cared more about furthering their own career than honoring the field, they would prioritize supporting their clients over contributing to the universal precedents of the law. A selfish lawyer wouldn't be immune to the law, because that's not what their job grants them, but they would be able to protect a client for profit by exploiting their knowledge of the law and suppressing what their client gets called out on. Knowing the law to sneak their clients around it would be what a corrupt and proactively selfish lawyer might do. In fact, if someone like this started out as a civil servant lawyer, like a public defense attorney, this desire might have motivated them to go private later on. A major detail we know about the Jojo lands is that it takes inspiration from Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul. The second chapter opened with a parody of Saul Goodman's debut episode, and Jodio's teamwork with Usagi mirrors Walter White's with Saul Goodman. Both Jodio and Usagi have creative anime-ish ways of getting out of problems and destructively insatiable greed. Their teamwork teamwork is spurred on by realizing they could exploit an incredible quality rock, but while Jodio's contribution is primarily being the devil on someone's shoulder, Usagi mostly embodies their creativity side, and his experiments lay a lot of the groundwork that Jodio's hunger then flourishes through and overshadows, while Jodio's ego forces the story to be told from his perspective, despite Usagi seeming to have more connections, and being who the plot has been structured around. Usagi parallels Saul Goodman's relationship to Walter White, but for a character so amazing, there hasn't really been anything to pay homage to Saul Goodman himself. And Saul Goodman was a public defense attorney who turned private after he found that he could live luxuriously by sneakily getting criminal clientele out of charges and being a gopher for the cartel. Key West could be the perfect homage to Saul Goodman, and if that's the case, then as an Easter egg, Key West's stand might take after Saul's underlying character journey. Because the point of Saul's story was that despite being a natural trickster, what he really cared about was family, which he only pushed away through the schemes he pulled to support them. So when everyone left him, all he had was the hollow empire of schemes he'd already built, and then once he lost that, he had nothing. His life was gray, and unable to move on, he could only fall back on his troublemaking. But since he was now forcing tricks to cope, rather than because he had the perfect opportunity for them, they failed. And at the end, he was only able to get back what he really cared for once he was able to renounce and move on from his scheming. If there is a song that perfectly embodies the core flaw that Saul had throughout his story, it would be about unhealthily sticking to a commitment after it's lost all feeling and purpose. And that's exactly the case for Eyes Without a Face. From the ability side, a corrupt lawyer might have a power that makes people unsure of details, forces them to stick to a statement, lets them represent or be a shield for someone, or more extreme, establishes a third party by creating a new representative. Something like these. But Eyes Without a Face is within the ballpark for being a namesake for any of these abilities. Obscuring details fits with the character wrapped in bandages, sticking to a statement fits the meaning, and any type of representing fits both the story behind the song and the name of the song itself. The only issue I have with this song choice is that based on how the series is written, I don't think two instances of an Easter egg would be done in the same way if a third is done differently. Evil Eye has I in the name, while Pump It only has I in the name of the band. So if the pattern between all namesakes is that they have an I somewhere, my guess would be that it's either in the name of the namesake song's album, or it's even less obvious than the first two. So either Evil Eye is technically named after another related Franz Ferdinand song, or Key West has a different song. If it's not Eyes Without a Face, then given the estimations of what the ability might be, I'd throw out The Real Thing as a long shot, because two of the big songs from there have the imagery of eyes in hands in their music videos, and their subject matter relates to the power ideas. But Key West aside, when Jodio's describing the hierarchy of mechanisms, he's talking about an organic web of systems strong enough to determine what happens in the world despite the law. He's describing the power of organized crime, an ecosystem that naturally lets inhabitants execute individual systems when need be because of how effective they are for accomplishing things. A team like Ningbo's is always necessary because an underworld is stabilized through regularly finding resources and advantages so it can afford to separately exist despite overlapping with a hostile base world. So you need an outer ring to stay on top of things by keeping you informed and at a distance from any tedious, urgent, or compromising work. But those informants are who Jodio's now caught the attention of. So I think what Jodio's really up against is one of his greatest fears, and something he would want to find a way on top of, no matter the cost.